Today we have Rachel Weber and Johnathan Johnson joining us. They're regional sales consultants for Batesville Products here. Rachel primarily handles the Eastern United States, and Jonathan's primary territory is the Western United States. As well, we have Tim Weber, who is the Vice President of Marketing here at Batesville Products, joining us to talk a little bit about the state of the Foundries today. So with that, go ahead and hand it over to Tim Weber.
Hey folks, yeah, it's kind of interesting times we've come through. So, we worked through a lot of issues in the past couple of years with supply chain issues, availability of materials, price of materials, lead times, scheduling. A lot of people have left the workforce. What we're noticing also currently is we're seeing a lot of folks, believe it or not, retiring. Which brings up some interesting things as far as training the next generation. Some of the good things, I guess, recently is the metal has stabilized, and it looks like the supply chain issues have kind of normalized, which is good. We still have some long lead times with a lot of folks, but it looks like as we started heading towards the end of this year, things are going to level out quite a bit. The retiring and training some of the workforce, that's a big deal. For us in particular, but what we're noticing is throughout the industry, a lot of good information, a lot of things that have been just handed down through the generations. And we're finding this ourselves, coming up with, training videos, trying to capture information with folks before they actually leave the workforce, and trying to get some of that tribal knowledge, in a place that we can transfer it to the next generation or to the folks coming up that have an interest in the foundry industry. It's exciting because we see a lot of interest in some of the younger folks graduating from college and moving through the trade schools. So we get a pretty interesting and dynamic workforce going on right here in our facility. And I noticed similar type of things being mentioned by some of the other folks and some of the other foundries that we deal with. They're seeing some of that same type of thing. And then, when we were all struggling with labor, and we still are, the push for robotics and any new types of advancements, what can we do to shorten, from point A to point B to get a casting cast and then through the facility? And a lot of it is automation, but some of it has to do with chemistry. How can we make a better aluminum part? How can we shorten lead times and distances between different processes? So a lot of dynamic things going on in the foundry industry. So what are you seeing, Tim Williams?
I think on the retiring workforce, something you and I have talked a lot about that is very interesting and may not be made aware to everybody out there is the stat that we heard is over the next 2.5 years, the labor market is losing 9.5 million people that won't be replaced. And that's due to the size of the baby boomer generation, as well as the generations that follow. And really, there's no way to make that up. You can't just reproduce that amount of people all of a sudden and have them available in the labor market. But that's a big workforce that's retiring and really pushing, I think, as you mentioned, on the robotic side of things. And I think, if you're not in the robotics and you're not looking at advancements on that side, you're steps behind at this point. I think, what you mentioned a little bit as well is the foundry industry. There have been a number of companies that take on the casting itself. You see it a little bit across the market, but really it's still an expertise that's needed out there. And with a shrinking market of available casting suppliers, according to American Foundry Society data, the foundries that are out there are taking on more and more work as well. So having less people to work, having more need for work, again, if you're not on the robotic side of things, I think there's a lack or a step behind there.
I also feel like your conversations with your customers, Tim, it seems like our sales team is closer to our customers than ever. It seems like we really truly are an extension of each other. Even we're not running their business, they're not running our business, but the flow of information is so much it's seamless. I also kind of see that with our employees, and that the feedback loop is closer, is more direct. We're getting better information. more qualified information that we can use to improve the process through our employees. It just seems like everybody's getting closer because we need to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously if there's a client that comes to us, they see a value that we provide for them, and it may be a value that they can't do internally. We see the same with our workforce. So, we have a lot of people, and we're hiring a lot of people to come in and apply expertise that may not have been at Batesville Products before. Different things that they've seen in different markets, or even in different types of casting processes that they could either apply to what we're trying to do here. A lot of times too, people are excited about what they can learn here and what they can take away, really in their everyday life as well. So interesting times for sure. I think it's a market that needs to be monitored, because again, there's a lot of foundries that are shutting doors, but the work stays there, and it continues to grow. And I think choosing a very good supplier to be able to do that and create those relationships with the value side of things is very important moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. It's an exciting time. It really is. So we're going to hand that off to Rachel and Jonathan, see what their thoughts is on the best way to handle
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Kind of piggybacking off what you said, Tim, I don't think it's just a unique thing in the foundry industry. I know we were at a trade show last week talking to a bunch of different manufacturers, and I think just manufacturing in general, seeing, a lot of increases in robotics. The workforce is ever changing. And I think, looking at suppliers and, what's the best way to, make your product, I think it's always a good time to relook at all that stuff.
Yep. And it's great too, as you said, the generation retires, a lot of that quality and knowledge goes with them. So when you add in the robotics, you're helping to bring in a little bit more consistency back into the manufacturing process.
Sure. And once it comes to, manufacturing for, casting, there's a lot of things to take in consideration, because not every process is going to be a fit for what your end product's going to be. And I think it's a good point. We do have a lot more detailed, slides and other things on our website. But, just what are we looking for in a casting versus a fabrication? What is the quantities needed? What casting method is going to fit your part depending on the complexity of it?
Yeah, and any good foundry, if they know a part is not going to be good for their process, they will tell you instead of trying to make it work. So having the right wall thickness, quantity, size, all of that matters. And if the foundry knows what they're doing and knows their process well, they'll be able to tell you that, and they'll also be able to recommend a different process, even if it's a different casting process to explore.
Yeah, and I think that's where we consider ourselves to be experts, right? We don't always have the answer for, being able to control that in-house or being able to produce your part in-house, but at least we can take your product, take a look at it, get it to our engineering team if, Rachel or I can't make that decision, and see what process would fit you better, or are you doing it correctly now and maybe casting's not for you. So I think that, bringing that information to us and letting us, help you guys along the way it's a great process. So
yeah, definitely.
Guys, I had a question from John, and I think I have the answer for this, but he was asking if we could provide the number of approximate U.S. foundries today. So, John, roughly it's about 1,600 different foundries. But as I mentioned previously, a lot of those foundries are encapsulated within a certain company. So if there's a company, maybe like Toyota, could be a good example. If Toyota has a casting that they want, sometimes they'll take on a foundry within their facility. And that's across a number of different industries. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It's across a number of different types of processes. So it could be die casting foundries, it could be sand casting foundries, investment casting, permanent mold casting. So it's a number of foundries within the industry, but also within companies that need castings itself. So not a ton out there, but a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I guess slide 2. Do you have experience in our industry, right? And Batesville Products, we've been around 76 years, and I feel like we have a pretty good grasp on the permanent mold industry and also other things. Because I mean, we do look at a ton of castings that end up being a die casting or a sand casting, or we're going to push them in the right direction. And we do a lot of learning as well. So I think that really helps to be able to point the guys in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think another great way to kind of look at the question too is, does that caster, that supplier, do they manufacture parts for similar product that you're looking to make? And do they have examples that they can show you? If you went to their foundry, would you be able to walk around and see something that you do that they're already making? Not necessarily the same design, but the way you would cast it would look similar. So they have a lot of experience already kind of making the product that you're going towards or the direction you need it for.
And just what your end product is going to. So you're gonna have different regulations depending on what industry you're going into, and just having the knowledge of, hey, if it's in the food industry, what do we have to do? If we're going into, something more along lighting, or it just doesn't really medical, there's all different kinds of regulations and different testing that needs to go into that. So just having that knowledge is
That's
great.
huge. Yeah.
And then, yep.
Yeah, that kind of actually plays into what you were saying. A lot of times with, if you're medical or food, you need to cast primary material because it needs to be pure. So if you recycle it, there could be potential for there to be other materials in it. So if a foundry is using recycled material versus primary, that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and what controls are in place and how often do they do the testing, certifications and other things for the metals. Those are all important questions to ask as well.
Oh, yeah. And then also how you control porosity, inclusion, and defects. I know there's a lot of new technology coming out. I know we're personally testing out some degassers. So again, kind of going back to that automation question, is your foundry using new equipment in the industry to try to better their process and to see what it is they can do to make up the parts even better?
Yeah, and I think the degasser has been great. I know, Tim, you've gotten some good feedback from the shop floor and everything like that, as far as, parts are coming back better because we're able to control a lot more things in the foundry.
I think you guys hit on a topic that really crosses over between number 2 and number 3 here, especially when you're talking about that degassing unit, because if you're working in an industry, Johnathan, I think you mentioned both medical, you mentioned food equipment, a lot of those industries that require certain level of casting expectations, if you're using secondary or primary metal, that's going to have a huge impact. And when you get in the automation side of things, you're setting up robots that aren't going to know whether there's a difference between primary or secondary. So all of this stuff needs to be solved out beforehand and really understood beforehand, so that when you're setting up your process, you're pouring the casting to expectations. We're in 74 different industries this year, and some of those industries really care about porosity and inclusions. Some are hidden, behind the scenes, and they have definite issue areas or concern areas, but overall may not have inclusion or porosity issues in certain areas. So you can design that to be casted out. But if you're using secondary metal, you can see more of that just from a basis standpoint, and it's important, right? So if you're looking at medical or food equipment, or you're looking at something that bears weight, it's definitely important to understand what type of metal and what industry expectations are.
Yeah, couldn't have said that any better. And moving on to the 4th slide, what secondaries do you handle? I think this is always a good question, because we don't do every single thing in-house, but we have really great partners that help provide a finished part for their assembly line, or you get it through the whole process, and we can control that too, because we've worked with some of these guys for so long.
Yeah, and especially if you're a smaller company or you have a smaller purchasing team, sometimes it's a lot harder to handle multiple suppliers. So do you want your foundry to be able to control the whole process so they can deliver you a final project or piece that is can determine whether you want to go forward with one supplier over the other, especially when it helps manage your workload and time, because everyone knows time is very minimal these days, and everyone keeps it very precious to them.
Sure. And I think after casting, the machining of the castings is probably the most important part, right? And I feel like we do have our own in-house, machine shop, and we're able to control a lot more of the parts. We can do that all the way through the finished product, like I mentioned. But yeah, like you said, you don't have to worry about trying to outsource a machining house, a coder, everything else. We can do that all here in-house, and it just adds value and does, like you said, makes the sourcing a lot easier.
Yes.
Is there anything more painful? I mean, that's what I just keep thinking of. Previous role I had, it's been, 7-8 years ago, but I was in the purchasing side. And if you're having to just buy a casting and then you get it in, and then you got to send it out to get machined, and then you get it back in, and then you got to send it out to get heat treated, and then you get it back in, then you got to send it out to get coated and back in and back and forth and polish and all that. I mean, is there anything more painful, again, from my previous role? It seems like a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's definitely important, because as we go back again, all these I feel like relate to each other. Number two, again, if you're trying to, do something for a specific industry, how are we able to handle the secondaries that meet those expectations for that casting? So, does the shop really maintain not only the casting side of things, but the polishing RMS that is required of the product to have a good coated finish, to have really good tight machining tolerances? If you handle that all in house, and you have the processes and the programs in place in house, that saves so much time and money for purchasing departments that have to get that in and send it back out, and get it in and send it back out, and not even including all the shipping costs in your time and effort to be able to do that.
Yep, definitely. And there's always going to have your outliers where there's going to be something that you need that it's just going to be beyond a lot of people's capabilities to do. So then that's another thing to consider as well, is, are you asking too much in your product? And is there an opportunity potential for redesign and reconsidering how you approach the project?
I'm going to rephrase that, Rachel. Maybe not too much. Maybe you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So we could ask, or what is important? What is actually important to you? Is it form, fit, and function? Is it the actual surface finish? And the interior of the casting could be all porous and porosity. That's typically not the route people want to go, or we like to go. But what is ultimately important for you and for your end customer?
Yep.
Yeah, and there's lots of surfaces that need certain, to hit certain levels, right? You got a surface, a B surface. What are you trying to get out of your part? Where's it going? Like you mentioned earlier, is it inside something that it doesn't matter as far as visual, but you may need something that's customer facing too. So you have the other end of the spectrum as well.
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes right back. Every slide goes right into the next one, and they even bounce back and forth. But the certifications, what testing, that all drives what product is, what's specific for each product and each customer.
Yeah. So definitely, if you need a lot of testing, that is a big question to ask your supplier, if they have the resources or contacts in the industry to help them with that testing, whether they do it in-house or have partners that can help them do it. Especially when it comes to food and medical, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and what processes are in place too? If they're ISO certified, they have a specific process for catching anything that might be an issue, right? So if it is, you are having a casting issue, you're having a defect, there's things in process to where you can follow that through, your system to make sure you can fix the problem, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a key point too, Johnathan, because a lot of the different testing capabilities out there, and I think Rachel hit on a little bit on the previous slide, but there's stuff that can be completely overblown. That it's way more than you need, but maybe your industry needs it. On the other side, as you were just talking about, Johnathan, is it something that solves a problem for you? So from heat treating or anodizing or clear chromate conversion, there's a lot of different types of processes, coatings, applications that can be done that really, again, outside of just a straight up secondary of polishing or machining or anything of that nature, it can solve a problem for a customer.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. How do you ensure quality standards are met? A big portion of it is one, understanding what the quality standard is for the customer and making sure it's all called out on their prints and making sure that we can know it up front so we can be clear on what is capable within the process. So it's very big for the foundry to understand what process is needed for the part specifically, so they can have the proper gas levels in the pots, and making sure that they develop their process so that they hit the right specs they need at the end of the day. And there's a lot of different ways to also help bring the quality up to standard. For example, we do a lot of liquid penetrant or pressure testing to make sure that you're following it when the quality standards that are needed.
Yeah, and as far as, first articles and PPAPs, each product's going to have different requirements. And you mentioned this, Tim, like the specifications and what you need to meet and what's required and how many times you need each part tested off the line, right? I mean, there's certain people that want the first and the last. There's people that want almost everything inspected as you go, because their requirements on that print and that product are so much tighter that they are allowing that allowance isn't there.
I almost think of this as like sometimes it's like a preventative maintenance, right? A lot of times you have these quality standards, you have these certifications that are required because you can't go down the line and have a liability of a crack, right? Or, especially like on the medical or food equipment side, you can't have food get into porous areas. So I see this in the standards around the quality side of things really help on the preventative maintenance side of things.
Yeah, and catching these things early too, right? If you've got the right inspection procedures in place, you're catching these earlier before they're going down the line. And it's huge, right? Our department does a great job of inspecting the castings, letting us know if there is an issue. And then if it is, how are we going to fix that? What processes are in place to go through either recasting or retesting to make sure we're hitting those specifications as well.
Yeah.
But I think you hit on a good point there, Rachel and Jonathan, early on. Make it known. Again, what's important to you, what's important to your end customers, make it known expectations, because there's permanent mold standard industries, there's casting standard industry standards, there's die casting, sand casting standards. For the most part, that provides usually what you're looking for. But if there's stuff that's important, tight tolerance threaded areas, or does the form, fit, and function need to be tighter? Those definitely are needed from a print perspective, so we can understand what you guys are looking for. If you're going to a different vendor, what expectations they would have to try and make sure that they're getting the quality product that you're looking for.
Yeah, we did another live event, Tim, about engineering, right? And Justin got on here and he was talking about these crazy specs, and once they got sat down, they didn't even need half of them, right? The tolerancing was so tight, and it was something that it was all what was on the print, right? It wasn't actually real life scenarios. And I think that's kind of something we like to sit down and really walk through every step of what you would need and what's important, and then getting engineering involved for those to redesign or not, maybe loosening tolerances or tightening them. So yeah, there's all different kinds of ways to go, and it all comes back to industry knowledge and just a company's knowledge.
Yeah, agree.
Well, and Jonathan, that stuff gets expensive. Right? So if you're coming from the purchasing side and you have these tight tolerance areas that aren't needed, we'll try to do what we can to meet those expectations if it's within our value chain here. But if it's not even needed, that could save you costs and make you look good.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So again, just kind of reiterating what we went through today is make sure that the supplier you're looking for has the materials that you actually need to cast, and what is the quality control that they have in place? How are they actually integrating automation into their process, and are they trying to push themselves to be with the industry or even ahead of the industry? I think those are some of the key things to really look out for, especially on a foundry side.
Yeah, and along those same lines, with quality controls and modern, well-maintained equipment. I mean, we love to have people out visiting our foundry.
Yeah.
We'd love to show off what we've done. We have a really great facility. It's a very clean facility, and it has a lot of other things that you really like to see the process. And I think a lot of people, understand casting, but you don't understand the whole process of the casting. So I think it's neat to be out and be able to visit, a supplier and kind of see how they work and see them in person is, really, really beneficial.
I agree.
And then, yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty close to everything we had. I think Tim mentioned earlier, if you had any additional questions, we can try to answer those now. I'm not sure what you guys got in, Tim.
So Jonathan or Rachel, if I'm coming to you as a potential supplier, potential customer looking for a casting, what types of information should I bring to you? Just high level.
Let's start.
Yeah, timing, when do you need the product by? What the application generally is going towards. If you have any type of print or model, that's a big deal, obviously. So we know what we're looking at and what we're going to be getting into. If you have any quantities that you plan to be casting for, that's a big deal in the casting industry, because quantities definitely drive the process for a lot of casters. So if you're looking for high volume, lightweight parts, like we'll tell you right away, look at die casting. So definitely quantity, and also the size of the part too, because sometimes even if you have a high quantity part, it might be too big for the die casting process. So it's just things to consider like that, as well as if you're open to design suggestions as well, is a big one.
Yeah, I think any kind of secondaries, I know the print's going to call that out, but what else can we do to help you finish the product to be able to, go ahead and manufacture your next step? That's kind of key. You did mention EAU, the amount you need per year, whatever, but I noticed sometimes too, maybe it's calling out a specific process regardless of that too. So that kind of makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But, from basic stuff, that would probably cover a lot of that, Tim.
Sorry, I had to find the mute button there for a second. What's the largest casting in the types of metals that Batesville Products can cast?
We can cast aluminum, A356, zinc, ZA5, and ZA12. I would say currently our largest part is just over 70 pounds. We have done parts over 100 pounds in the past, but right now, I think our heaviest part is ranging around 70 pounds after you remove gating. So if you include gating, we're looking closer to 100 pounds on the part.
Yeah, and I think with the presses we have, that 100-pound limit is probably pretty close to as big as we cast, because you're limited on size too, right? So that kind of becomes a constraint. So nothing probably over that 100-pound weight limit with gates and risers attached.
Yeah, and that largely has to do too with the castings are being poured by man, so they're gonna be picking up 25 to 50 pound ladles every time, and they're gonna have to pour multiple ladles just to fill that one part in. So that's another thing you have to consider of when you're looking at a foundry, because there are, when you go really large in castings, there are some foundries, especially if you look at large sand casting foundries, their pots are the ladle essentially, so that they can fill in enough metal quick enough. So that is definitely something to consider.
Yeah, not just the casting, but getting the casting out and moving it around. So there's other things you got to consider as far as, do you need a crane to assist lifts to help take some of that pressure off the caster? So yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it early on the robotics, right? So you're talking about humans right now lifting 30 to 50 pound ladles. That's a big concern of ours, and that's why we're getting into the robotic casting side of things. That's why we did robotic polishing, and that's why we did cobots on cobot assisted on the machining side of things. Some of these castings are the wear and tear on humans has really been a detriment to the foundry market as we continue down the path here. We had some specific questions that were asked, and it was, I believe, John and Jake. John and Jake, I'm going to have Jonathan and Rachel specifically reach out to. We actually have a casting design guide that's available as well on our website that can help answer those types of questions. But I think being more specific, I'd like for them to reach out to you guys specifically. Again, I mentioned our design guide. It is available on our website. Our marketing team does a fantastic job here really does break down a lot of our live events, our webinars, videos into guides, into blogs, a lot of short clip videos. So feel free to check us out on any of our social media platforms. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime. We actually have a podcast as well. But a lot of informative things that are out there from our marketing team. So a lot of the questions that you guys have may be able to be answered there. But always feel free to reach out to our team, and we'll get everything answered that we can and see if we can help you guys out. With that, Johnathan, Rachel, thank you for your time. Thank you everybody for joining today, and for Tim Weber early on there. And enjoy your day.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Thanks,
Tim.
Tim.